Indigo has been a company and a stock in focus, and that is on account of the public spat that has captured headlines as well as mind space, and that has led to a significant erosion. We've just seen the Indigo Aviation's AGM amend the Articles of Association. It has been cleared by shareholders, and now the expansion of the board, inclusion of a woman director, a new related party transactions policy will all be set in motion. Joining us now to explain where things currently stand between the two promoters, what the board makes of the dispute and the current truce, as well as Indigo's future flight path. Joining us is the chairman, Mr. M Damodaran. So thanks very much for joining us here on CNBC-TV18. As I pointed out, this has captured headlines, mindspace. It's led to a significant erosion of capital, almost 13,000 crore rupees of market capitalization wiped out over the last 2 months because of this very acrimonious public spat. What is the situation today? Mr. Gangwal was not present at the AGM. The AGM has cleared the amendments of the Articles of Association. Is this truce sustainable?
Well, I think a truce is certainly sustainable, but truce is not peace. And I'm looking forward to a day, not in the distant future, when we will have peace rather than truce.
Okay. So what's the difference to your mind qualitatively between truce and peace where things currently stand?
Truce is, I think, closer to a ceasefire than a peace is.
Okay.
Peace is when you put everything behind you and decide that, okay, none of these issues survive. And what we need to do is look ahead and take the airline to even higher growths. You did mention the erosion of market cap. The good news is that we are nearly back to almost the highest price levels that the share has touched post its listing. Therefore, much of what was notionally lost has been regained, which I believe is a manifestation of the confidence of the shareholders that things are not as bad as they thought they would be.
Okay.
And post the AGM, I think there is work to do in terms of taking advantage of the amended Articles of Association and ensuring that we have a bigger board, a more representative board in terms of 4 independent directors in a board size of 10, which is higher than what the law mandates or the regulations mandate, getting a woman director on board, getting an executive director on board. We don't have an executive director on board at this point of time. All the 6 directors on the board are non-executives. So all of that will get addressed very quickly now that the articles are amended.
So you said that there is a ceasefire, not quite peace yet, between the promoters. Given the fact that putting a new related party transactions policy was one of the key demands of Mr. Gangwal, board expansion was another key demand of Mr. Gangwal, inclusion of a woman director was part of his demand list as well. Now that there has been a decision to move forward on each of these, is this enough to buy peace?
Well, I think certainly we are on our way to peace. There is a conversation that has taken place between both the promoters. I'm not privy to what they discussed, but the fact that there has been a conversation among people who've known each other for more than 30 years, I think is good news. When I said that truce is a ceasefire, I was only looking at what truce literally means. It is not truce versus peace.
Okay.
It is truce as a step in the direction of peace.
Okay. Since we're talking about the direction of peace, let's talk about the related party transactions, because this has been the big sort of concern that Mr. Gangwal has raised publicly. He's written to the regulator about it. He's written to the Ministry of Corporate Affairs about it. Can you explain to us the changes that have been made to the related party transaction policy? And also, I mean, does the board believe that the concerns raised by Mr. Gangwal are legitimate?
Well, let me first set out what exactly a related party transaction needs to have in order to be legitimate. Both under law and regulation, there are only 2 requirements. One is that the transaction must be in the ordinary course of business. 2, it must be an arm's length transaction, no favorable pricing to a related party. That's it. 99.9% of the policies that are in place in the corporate space have just these 2 requirements and nothing else. Our policy travels further. It is arguably, as we speak today, the best policy in terms of additional safeguards.
You're talking about the new policy, the changes that have
Absolutely.
been made.
But let me step back and address your question. Was there really a concern? Should there have been a concern? Let me roll back. What are these transactions? There are 7 or 8 transactions, none of which is new, none of which is with new parties. They've been around year after year. They've been approved every year by the audit committee. After looking at both these tests, auditors have certified them. An independent study that I got done has certified that these are all right.
The EY study, you mean?
The EY study. Thereafter, as we speak today, there's not one single policy that is without the transaction that is without the approval of the board. And therefore, if you notice, the conversation has shifted from RPTs to RPT policy. So you need to have an RPT policy. And what was the demand? The demand was that you should not have a dilution of policy unless there is broad-based acceptance. And therefore, it's been decided in the new policy that any dilution will take place only if all the independent directors. The original proposal was that the board should decide, but that would have given veto rights to an individual director. And we felt it was much better to entrust this to the independent directors who will decide unanimously whether a dilution is warranted in any circumstances. I don't see that happening. So there was no problem earlier.
But
since the problem was raised, additional safeguards have been put in place.
Since I raised the issue of both SEBI as well as the Ministry of Corporate Affairs being brought into this discussion, I know that SEBI had asked for a representation from the company provided its representation. Have you heard back from the regulator? Is the company or the related party transactions under investigation?
There is no investigation. Let me clarify that straight away. The word investigation is a technical word, very loosely used by people as if to say that any correspondence translates to an investigation. It does not. When SEBI or any regulator, for that matter the MCA, gets a complaint from somebody, it is obliged to get the response of the entity complained against, which is what has happened. SEBI as well as the MCA said, we've received this, give us your comments. Detailed comments were made available by the company management. Looking at those responses, SEBI wanted a couple of additional documents to be made available. They've been made available. As far as I know, as we speak today, there is nothing from SEBI or the MCA which indicates any dissatisfaction with any of the explanations or responses offered by the company. And therefore, I think it's fair to say that there is nothing that is pending to be addressed at the company's level in regard to the matters that have been raised in those letters. If there are, we will get to hear about it in due course. But the fact that we haven't heard means that there is no fire that needs to be put out.
There is no fire that needs to be put out. That is your understanding, because you haven't heard back either from SEBI or MCA post your representations to them, and you're saying that the company is not under investigation. Let me then ask you, sir, are there differences over business strategy? Because what we've heard from both sides is that while there have been differences on related party transactions, board expansion, etc., business strategy, there was alignment. Is the board and are the promoters in alignment over business strategy?
There is complete alignment in the board regarding business strategy. There is not a single element of non-alignment in the board and among the promoters as far as the future plans of Indigo are concerned. And if there were, we would have heard about it. You would have heard about it. The world would have heard about it. There's been none at all. I know there have been speculative reports in the papers, but that's not something that I wish to comment on. The fact that in spite of all of what has happened in the boardroom, call it boardroom turbulence, there has been no turbulence as far as airline is concerned. Sorry. It's still doing as well as it did. It's doing better than it did last month. The last quarter that went by has been the best quarter, and that's a quarter when all of this was playing out. So the fact that stakeholders, and who are our principal stakeholders? The people that fly Indigo. When 50% of your domestic market uses your airline, and you are keeping them happy because your Flights are going to where they intended to go. We're connecting more destinations. The frequency is improving. International flights are doing well. In terms of market share, the latest CAPA study shows that Indigo has done very well in the short time that has been in the international market. All of that clearly indicates that there is no issue with strategy, and I think we have a good management team which is running this
So
very
if I
well.
could break that into specifics, there is alignment on things like international expansion, because that is something that shareholders were also asking the company about at the AGM. There is no difference on the future of international expansion.
None at all.
What about vendor negotiations? Because this has also been speculated on that Mr. Gangwal was unhappy with being kept out of negotiating with OEMs, with vendors. Is there truth to this?
My understanding is, based on all the documents that I have seen, the correspondence that I've seen, he opted out of vendor negotiations.
Mr. Gangwal opted out of the vendor?
Opted out at maybe sometime last year, I think around October maybe, perhaps earlier, I don't know, where he said that, look, I don't wish to be associated with this. And then the company put in place a team that took up the negotiations, and they've hit the ground running. In fact, they have concluded a very major deal to the satisfaction of all concerned. So it's not that somebody kept him out. After all, let's remember that he's had a good track record of negotiations. Why would anybody keep him out?
Which has been acknowledged by Rahul Bhatia as well.
Mr. Rahul Bhatia at the AGM, in response to a shareholder query, said that at every forum that he speaks, he acknowledges his co-founder's role in the growth of the airline. And I think that's a statement that he made. I don't have to make it on his behalf. He made it at the AGM. So the role is acknowledged. The fact that he had been in charge of negotiations done well. But when he opts out, the company needs to put a team in place, which is what it has done.
Well, speaking of putting a team in place, let's talk about the board expansion, and the decision has been taken to expand the board to 10, as well as the inclusion of independent woman director as per the norms. By when will we see the expansion take place, as well as the inclusion of the woman director?
Well, let's take the second question first. The woman director has to be in place on or before the 30th of September.
That's the hard stop.
That is the hard stop. We have no choice in the matter. It's taken a while. The reason has been that with a board size of 6, one of our problems was, where do you fit in a woman independent director? So you needed to get the articles amended to expand the size of the board. That has been done. That has been put behind us. Now the path is clear to appointing a woman director. We have a month ahead of us, and hopefully we should have a woman independent director in place well before the end of the month. But this is a non-negotiable situation. There will be a woman independent director before the 30th.
And what about the board expansion itself?
And as far as the other members are concerned, well, I did mention that, we had a 6-member board with so many problems, because the size of the board, when it's so small, does not enable you to properly constitute committees. And board committees are many mandatory committees, and board committees are important, increasingly important. You can't have the same director sitting in all the committees, which is what is happening at this point of time. One independent director is on all the committees, and that's not a situation which is good either for him or for the company. So you need more independent directors. We will have 4 independent directors in both sides of 10, which is more than the mandated 1/3. We'll be marginally exceeding it. Therefore, that issue will get addressed. We need to have an executive member on the board. There are 6 members on the board today.
Non-executive.
And all are non-executive. How do you run a company that is this big and growing? So you need to get, we had Aditya Ghosh was on the board, but since he left, we haven't had an executive. So with this expansion, we will bring in a woman independent director, we will bring in an executive member, a whole-time director on the board, and the other vacancies will also get filled sooner rather than later.
Since we're talking about the inclusion of more independent directors, sir, I want to raise the issue of independence, because your independence as chairman has also been questioned while we've seen this public spat being debated, and that has been an issue both Mr. Gangwal as well as Mr. Khanna have alluded to. How do you respond to that, and do you believe that that issue is now a thing of the past?
Let me tell you 2 or 3 things. If you look at Mr. Gangwal's letter to SEBI, the first letter, There is an interesting part there where he says this chairman is non-executive because he's been nominated by the IGE group. But he goes on to add, but we are not saying that he's functioning in a non-independent fashion. There's a specific assertion there which I think is a positive statement. 2, the articles state that the IGE group has the power to nominate. But it's not that the IGE group sends a name one day and by evening that gentleman or lady becomes a chairperson of the board. This goes to the nomination committee. The nomination committee looks at it. With the recommendations, it goes to the board. And I've seen the minutes. Both the NRC and the board have not just unanimously approved it. They've welcomed my joining the board, which is exactly the procedure that was followed when the earlier chairman, the first chairman, was appointed. Mr. Malaya was appointed. Of course, I've seen news items which say that until now all chairmen have been independent. This is the first non-independent chairman. Firstly, there's been only one chairman before me after the listing. And the second thing is he was appointed exactly the same way. Now, there is no name of a director which falls from the skies. Somebody brings a name to the NRC. Here, the name was brought by the IGE group in exercise of its powers under the articles. But that doesn't make anybody less independent. Independence, I have always maintained, is a state of mind. I sit on the boards of several companies, several large and respected companies as an independent director. And I don't think anybody's questioned the way I function independently. And I would love to see evidence of my non-independent functioning. Yes, I will take decisions which, if there are two sides to a question, which will be on one side, may not be on the other side. It doesn't mean that I am functioning non-independently. Even if you take the size of the board, 10 was not the size that the IGE group wanted. 10 was not the size that Mr. Gangwal wanted. Where did 10 come from?
Came from you.
We looked at all numbers between 7 and 12 and reached 10. So to think that, somebody says something and the chairman, because his name originally came from there, says, okay, we'll have 10, we won't look at any other number. We agonized over 2 days to get that number. It didn't come easily. There must have been a lot of give and take.